Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. It's election day. We have a special show for you all about the U.S. election and China, and we have a special guest, Roman Balmakov from the Epoch Times. He's also the host of the popular show Facts Matter. So welcome, Roman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tiffany, for having me on.
You do not sound excited about this.
Well, no, I'm very excited. You told me it's very casual, so
as we show up in a suit. But yes, so basically, we've been hearing from the FBI, the heads of the CIA, all the intelligence agencies, and also from both sides of the aisle, the Democrats and the Republicans, that China is a big threat, especially no matter who wins the White House. There's a lot of global tensions there. There's the wars in the Middle East, of course, Russia, Ukraine, and the tensions in Asia. We're seeing that around the Philippines and Taiwan. We've been covering that here. We also just heard from VP nominee J.D. Vance, the senator of Ohio, telling a town hall he was really urging Gen Z voters to turn out and vote, saying that, if they don't, they might inherit World War III and a possible draft. So we're here to learn about what you all think about the issues of China. And just like you, we haven't seen these clips, so we don't know what to expect.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be live reacting.
So on that note, let's see what the first one is. I think the first interview is about TikTok. So it looks like the question that was asked to these people on this. Oh yeah, so we were interviewing. I was not interviewing. Our team was interviewing people on the streets of New York City and Washington, D.C. to get a sampling of what Americans think about these China issues. So the first question asked was about TikTok. For people who don't know yet, TikTok is a Chinese-owned. ByteDance is the Chinese company that owns TikTok. They actually have a different version of it called Douyin that's played in China or used in China. And then we and the rest of the world get something called a TikTok that's very addictive, has a very addictive algorithm. Very popular in the U.S.
So the question you had asked is, do you like TikTok? Okay, I mean, I just feel like that's like, okay, so the answers are going to be like yes or no. Okay, let's watch it. I don't know what we're going to comment if it's like yes, okay. I feel like you could have had a better question you asked people. But okay.
I was not part of this.
All right.
Let's see what happens. Okay.
47 minutes? Oh, seconds. Okay, that's good.
We're here all day and all night.
All right.
I personally love TikTok. I think it's a great way to reach a lot of different information, a lot of different sides. I like that there's not. Part of it is like I wish some things were censored just because if like children are using, I think there should be an age limit on who can use it, just because if children are watching, like there's so much out there like graphic that I don't think children should see. At the same time, I think there's a very good flow of information, like you're able to find out about anything. Do I wish I stopped using it? Yes, because it takes a lot of my time and I feel so unproductive and I feel like a lazy potato watching it.
I downloaded TikTok. It asks you what you want to see, and the first things that popped up were absolutely not who I was, and I'm like, I want no parts of this.
Yeah, she also doesn't look like the age demographic that's meant. I mean, it's like, that's the main user base of TikTok. That's completely understandable, yeah. But the first lady, her reaction, I feel like, that would be like, I think most people's answers, right? It's like, because I think TikTok, if I could describe it accurately, it's like Instagram on steroids. You know what I mean? Like whatever the algorithm on Instagram is, that kind of like there's that one little, you keep scrolling, looking for that one little hook. You're hoping for that little piece of information. You just keep scrolling, looking for that gem. And I feel like what TikTok has done, it's like the TikTok algorithm has just figured out whatever Instagram is trying to do with their like little gems that they're giving you, and they're just like, on TikTok you're just gem after gem after gem after gem. It's like a freight train of reels. I mean, it's really addictive. Like it's probably like 4 times more addictive than Instagram, at least like from my subjective experience,
Let's talk about the algorithm, because a lot of that does come down to the algorithm itself, because on, say, something like Instagram, right, you're training the algorithm. It's mostly who you follow, who you interact with, and then the algorithm's like, oh, maybe, your friends are liking this, and that's how it provides you content. But TikTok, the algorithm, you don't have to be following anyone on TikTok to be already fed content, because it gives you things. And depending on how you react to what you're given, it curates your feed that way. And that's the danger if you want to talk about, you know, the preteens or the teens that are on it, where you have those cases of, say, depression or mental health, where they go on there, they're like, ooh, let's go look at these jokes. I think you've covered those reports, right? It's like they go on there for the jokes, the fun content, and then they get fed the very depressing content, and then they stay on it, and the algorithm's like, oh, you like this, and they give it more and more and more.
Well, it's even more like it's even more nefarious. I don't know, nefarious, but probably nefarious. But like you're scrolling. You know, the way the algorithm is like constantly tracking you, right? So it's like you're scrolling, and then like there's some super depressing content, and you'll stop on it for an extra like 2 seconds longer than you would with the other content, and then the algorithm is like, ooh, you're into the depressing, yeah, you're depressed. You know, you want the depressed content, and it really does. Then like, you know, then you get like maybe 2 and 3, and it's like it's a downward spiral, or it could be an upward spiral depending on what you're like looking at. But you know, one thing. It's like I always kind of want to look at it in like maybe 3 ways. One is like, okay, like for information dissemination, it's like amazing, especially if you want to like just communicate with anyone under the age of 30. And that's like pretty much what they're using, and it's the fastest probably way to like go viral and literally get just information out there, especially to people under 30. But
depends on the content. Not all content goes viral.
No, that's true. But that's true on any platform too.
Start talking about Taiwan, not going to go
really?
viral.
Does Taiwan stuff actually get like suppressed like that?
Especially if you look at the hashtags for, say, something like Xinjiang. You know, you want to talk about the Uyghur genocide, the ethnic minority group in China, right? Parts of China, depending on who you talk to. If you look at the hashtags under it, the content that's pushed on TikTok, it's like the content from, say, Beijing or like the Chinese public services, where it's like, oh, everyone's dancing, everyone's having a great time. You're not going to see the genocide aspect that, you know, certain countries like the UN are saying is happening to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And then so instead you have the other type of content where someone's pretending to be doing a makeup video tutorial, or like a haul of some like clothes or whatever, and then in the middle of that video they start talking about the genocide. So it's like it depends on.
Oh, interesting. But is it different on Instagram in regards to like let's say if you search Xinjiang on both, like is it like discernibly different?
It's yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. But that, you know, when I was in Sri Lanka for a story, I was when I kind of like had just time to roam around, I just asked people their opinion on the U.S. and also on like I think let's just say I asked people his opinion on the U.S., but I didn't tell them I'm an American. I just just chatting with them because I just wanted to know what they thought.
Did you put on an accent to pretend you're not American?
No, I can't do that. But to the average Sri Lankan, I don't think they can discern like the nuances of the American dialects. I mean the English dialects. But anyway, what was I going to say? Totally.
You asked the average Sri Lankan what they think about America.
And a few of them, you know what was interesting? They told me their annoyance about how like Twitter and Instagram, which are used a lot in Sri Lanka, they're owned by American companies. And so it was funny listening to them, because you know in America a lot of people say that about TikTok. They say like, well, it's Chinese owned, they can get our information, which I completely think is true. And also like I guess what you described too, they can like sort of export Chinese censorship this way, right? So it kind of goes both ways. But it's funny how like in Sri Lanka, it was just such a unique perspective, because they think the same thing about our social media platforms. They're like, you know, all of our politicians use Twitter to communicate with another. It's like super annoying that Twitter is like this American company, because in their minds it's just America, some other country, you know, obviously, right?
So they want like a Sri Lankan Twitter.
Yeah, something like that. Well, they just kind of think like, oh, it's like this. Twitter is a geopolitical tool that the U.S. is using, and it sort of like underpins their communications politically in the country. So I feel like we need to wake up in America to the same thing. Like, I mean, this lady, she didn't mention it actually. It's funny. She did not mention the China aspect. She mentioned like some censorship in terms of like, you know, not letting young people view the crazy stuff. But it's funny that she didn't mention anything about China. But that was only one interview. I was hoping for like, it was going to be like 12 of these.
I think there's more.
But they're different questions. Unless it's the same lady. Is it the same lady with multiple
We're
different
gonna
questions?
find out. Hey, I didn't do the interviews.
All right, yeah, let's see. Let's see what the next question says.
Let's see. I think the next one is also about TikTok, but about data. like data protection. So TikTok is Chinese-owned, or its parent company is Chinese-owned ByteDance. So if the Chinese regime asks Chinese companies to hand in their data, the companies have to follow that order by law. This is a Chinese law we're talking about. So given that, are you concerned about your data as an American falling into the hands of the Chinese communist regime? That was the question.
I don't think I'm that important to Chinese government. I don't think Chinese government wants my data.
My data is probably already out there, and I've kind of accepted that, and I'm sure our data is being sold or handed out, distributed, whatever you want to call it, every day. So I don't think TikTok is the only danger of that to our society.
The frog has been slowly boiled. It looks like it's true, right? I mean, they're not wrong. That's the problem. Everything they said is absolutely true.
But I do think, I think they were right that yes, because you do see, other companies like Meta, so under all the Google as well, they sell the targeted ads, right? So they want your information, and then you have all the memes online where it's like you're scrolling, you're like, oh my gosh, I need something, and then you have the joke that all the companies are listening on the other side of the door, like, oh my, feed them that ad. So you have that element, but I do think when it comes to TikTok, why it's, the government, the U.S. government is trying to get rid of it, or at least have it divest from its Chinese parent company, to protect the data. There are another level of concerns when it comes to a company like TikTok, because it's just so much more. They had a lot of, you saw those congressional hearings on it too, and there's been a lot of reports on it where TikTok doesn't just track you when you're in the app, it's tracking everything that you do. So your keystrokes, your biometrics, your health info, things that it wouldn't need for something like that, you would think.
But I guess even if you just kind of circle back to the idea that it is a Chinese company, so they could be using subtle ways to influence you, and the election's a good example, right? If the Chinese government decides that either Kamala or Trump is better for China if they were in office, and they could theoretically at least force ByteDance to make TikTok lower conservative content a certain degree leading up to the election, and maybe they do it in a way that it looks so organic that you can't even pinpoint it's look at this massive drop in conservative content right before the election. They can just make it gradual. They can do anything they want if it's their platform, right? So I guess in that sense that's true, but I guess if they track you more, I guess they can serve you more liberal content if you're conservative, or vice versa. I guess they can do that type of stuff.
Part of the concern is are you really, or with the way you lean politically, for example, maybe you go in, you don't care about either candidate, you're like, yeah, whatever, but then you start getting fed, to your point, certain content, and then you're like, wait, no, I care deeply about this candidate, I have to make sure this candidate wins, whereas maybe you wouldn't have been so involved. So then that's part of the concern, where it's is it motivating certain groups and not giving you the information that you do need, because we are seeing more and more reporting saying that 1/3 of young Americans under the age of 30, they get their news from TikTok, right? They're not getting it from the mainstream media, the legacy media, your show, for example. They're just getting it from TikTok. So whatever the algorithm decides they should see is their news source. And then obviously if they go to school, they talk to their friends, they go to work. If you have that type of conversation, you would get some other info. But otherwise, all of your information, your news, your worldview, is shaped by TikTok, and it's the algorithm. It's not what you're interacting with, it's what they feed you, and then if you pause on it, they're like, ho, you want more of this content. So that's part of the privacy, those types of concerns as well. Where data aside, it's also an influence op, where you saw that during, say, the Soviet Union, where they try to influence people. It wasn't as good because they didn't have that type of technology. They're literally sending little pamphlets flown over areas, and then if you read it and agree with it, that's how they influenced you. But now it's this level of technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a story, I think, in the either the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday. Oh, this is not, not yesterday. That a few days ago, actually, and definitely. And the story was that in Lebanon, the U.S., I think it was the State Department, was it? It was either the State Department or maybe actually the DOD, one of the agencies in the U.S., they were running Tinder ads in Lebanon, and the Tinder ad just said, "Don't assist terrorists in their fight against U.S. allies. And the picture was like a U.S. bomber. And there was another ad like, if Lebanon assists in fighting U.S. allies, we have F-35s ready to go, like right off your coast or something like that. This is on Tinder, right? And the idea was that they're trying to have people not support Hezbollah if they have the opportunity in Lebanon. But if you think about it, so the U.S. government thought it was effective enough to go to Tinder and take out these ads. So they're spending money to advertise in Lebanon, and apparently they probably dumped a good amount of money because apparently it was like throughout the whole country. So it's, I'm sure not cheap, right? In terms of like a CP.
So where our tax dollars are going.
I would actually encourage, like, that's a good use of our tax dollars to like avoid this war, which would cost like 1,000,000 times more in our tax dollars. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. But my point is that like the U.S. government is probably spending, let's say, $1 million on these ads. They're probably not that expensive. Let's say $2 million. Because they know it affects people. Now imagine like ByteDance affecting, like everyone on their phone has TikTok already. So it's like they don't need to spend any money. They can just say, I don't know, it might be a controversial take to make, but like, if let's say your enemy nation has the option to like promote to their young men, hey, you should take estrogen and be more feminine, or hey, here's a bunch of content of men chopping wood and like being more manly and doing sports. It's like, if that's your enemy nation, what would you want their young men to be served more of? Like, hey, why don't you take this estrogen? Maybe like, manly things aren't for you. It's not necessarily important to be manly in today's world. It's like, sure, maybe there's a subset of people who like just think that way. But then if that's your enemy nation, you want to encourage that subtly. And suddenly, like that old lady said, you log into TikTok for the first time and you're like, this content, I don't feel like it's for me. And it's like a bunch of like that kind of weird content that might encourage you, if you're a man, to take estrogen.
Or like to your earlier point of the depressing content that you pause on, it's also a way to demoralize a whole population. You were seeing reports just a couple months ago that the Army was struggling to hit its recruitment goals in the U.S. because people don't think America is a country that's worth defending or fighting for. So you have that difference where, say, during World War I, World War II, young men were lying about their age, saying they were older so that they could enlist. And now you ask the average person, you're like, hey, you want to die for this country? They're like, no way. So you have that change, and then a lot of that comes back to, say, soft power that we're talking about, or these like subtle ways of influencing people from the content they're reading, or perhaps what they're learning in school, or just what they're seeing online. So you have that element as well, not just data and privacy concerns. Speaking of feeling patriotic, let's talk about Taiwan. Okay. So democratically ruled and governed, never under communist China rule.
Why would I feel patriotic about talking about Taiwan?
Are we going to defend Taiwan?
I mean, the Taiwanese people can feel patriotic about that, but maybe I have ideological, sort of alignment, but I have no patriotism towards Taiwan. I have patriotism towards America. I'm throwing that out there, but go ahead.
Question is not if you're going to go fight for them. It's why China would want to take over Taiwan. Okay. Question is, do you think China really wants to take over communist China? Let's be real.
Okay, so the question to the people on the street, do you think China really wants to take over Taiwan?
Yes, okay. And some background is that, current Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping has been saying that, he's vowed to take over Taiwan by 2027 by force if necessary. So there are other ways, right? Because Taiwan has different factions. Like we have parties here, like Democrats, Republicans, but there's a pro-Beijing camp. So another way that Beijing could take over Taiwan without force is if that becomes the ruling party, and then the government basically decides that, hey, we want to join communist China. So that would be a different way. So if it's still democratically ruled and governed, and they're like, no, we are sovereign, we don't have to talk about independence or not because we're our own sovereign thing, you do you over there, then communist China's like, I'm going to take it over by force. So I'm going to send in my warplanes. We've been seeing a lot of war games around Taiwan, ramping up like over 100 planes in a day, that type of scenario. And each time, like even if they're not actually fighting a war, right, Taiwan has to send out a response because you're crossing into, say, someone else's air defense identification zone, like someone else's property, if you will, so you have to send someone out even if you're not clashing. So that's tiring one side's forces. And then the main thing is making the rest of the world, the media world, so disenfranchised, or they're just like, oh, it's another routine drill, that when they actually wage a war, you don't care anymore. But some background there. Do you think China really wants to take over Taiwan? That's the question. Let's hear what people think. These are now in DC.
Oh, okay.
I think they want to take the island, and they're going to if they see an opening and a weakness in the allied nations that are supporting Taiwan.
Yes, I've heard of Taiwan. Yes, that was a colony of England, right? Oh, that is Hong Kong. Sorry, so you said Taiwan.
What? You kept this in?
I don't know too much
That
about
is
Taiwan.
hilarious. Okay. Well, okay,
Comedy hour with Roman.
I will say, okay, I maybe you're.
Can you point to Taiwan on a map?
Can I? Yeah. but
Hey,
but you know, actually, maybe your producers kept this in. Maybe this was like a very representative answer. Maybe a lot of people are like,
it's very small, right? So that's
Yeah.
the point where a lot of people, you know, they look at Taiwan, they're like, this tiny little island far away, why should we care? Several reasons why we should care what happens to Taiwan. You know, you might have seen in the headlines about the economic powers, TSMC chip maker. You know, if you want to talk about your cell phones, air conditioning, electric cars, fighter jets, they all need microchips. And TSMC makes the world's most advanced microchips, and it has like, you know, over 90% of the world's most advanced microchips. They are trying to build a plant in Arizona, so.
Oh no, they did. It's operational.
That is true.
Yeah.
That was last year that they were trying.
Yeah.
It's actually a better, you know how in any facility, factory, whatever, there's like the duds, the ones that don't meet the standard.
Yeah, you're looking at one right now.
So the one in Arizona has like less duds than the one in Taiwan. So we're off to a good start there.
Yeah, that's cool.
But either way, so economic, that's one part. If you want to look at it from a military perspective, because right now you have the wars in the Middle East, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, whoever's next president has to deal with, you know, global chaos. Taiwan is part of what's known as the first island chain that surrounds China. So it's...
Hold on, why are you explaining? I know that. I know all this. Like, but this woman didn't even know what Taiwan is. She thought she got the Hong Kong.
Right here.
Yeah. I know. Like, what are you explaining this to me? Before I fully understand.
All right, respond to the lady.
Okay. I feel like you're explaining it to the audience, not to me. Like, I know exactly about the first island chain. But anyway, but I feel like her answer is representative. So I feel like, because, and that's important actually, because, like, you know, the first guy, he said, like, they want to take it over, and they will take it over. That's what he said, right?
Especially if allied nations look weak, you said.
Exactly. But, okay, so which allied nations are they talking about? It's really America. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really the U.S. Security guarantee that provides for Taiwan. But this woman, is she American? Come to think about it, she has an accent. Let's just listen to this for a sec.
She's wearing a Ralph Lauren jacket.
So you said Taiwan. I don't know too much about Taiwan.
Okay, it's a little confused. She might be. She has a slight accent, but that could be still American. Because what I'm thinking is
New Yorker. There's a lot of people in New York with accents.
But my point in saying that was that, you know, America has to have the political will to defend Taiwan, especially after everything else that's happened, like, you know, Israel, Ukraine, something potentially in Guyana. If that even kicks off in Guyana, that's like, people are going to be even more fed up with these overseas wars. So it's like, so you combine that with like, how many people think like her? Like, yeah, Taiwan, I've heard of Taiwan. And, you know, then you have something going through Congress like, you know, $700 billion to Taiwan to defend against an actual Chinese aggressive attack. And people are like, I don't okay, then the reality sets in like, okay, I don't even know where Taiwan is, right? So that's like, I wonder if there's enough people like her who don't even understand the importance of Taiwan or where it is or like the history of why we're even like, we have a security guarantee with them, the relationship between them and communist China. Like, I wonder if there's enough people in the US that it would weaken our resolve to actually do anything. You know, because at the end of the day, it is in theory, a democratic republic, right? So like if enough action is taken, those people will be voted out of office and then there'll be a turnover. So I feel like that second interview was actually quite representative. because I've gone around the country and I've also asked people about Taiwan just in random conversations, and it's true, a lot of people are not very clear on on the island, and the role that TSMC, for instance, plays in global everything, global finance, modern life, yeah. I mean, the fact that they open up a plant in Arizona actually hurts Taiwan, which also kind of just shows that they are, in my opinion, like a decent ally. That the fact that they would make that move, even though it's like strategically bad for them, but then they still did it. I wonder what the thinking was behind that.
But then it's like if you like, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, like, say you only have one factory, right? Then you're easily targeted.
But then you have to defend Taiwan. That was
what
a
if something happens? But if you have another one, even if this goes offline,
so they're going to defend the Arizona facility. It's like, okay,
Arizona's about to get a lot of jobs.
Arizona's about to get 20 million Taiwanese immigrants.
Hey, highly skilled. You have to be really highly skilled to work here.
I mean, I wouldn't complain in theory, but I don't live in Arizona. I'm sure the Arizonians might feel differently, but yeah, you're right. In theory, they're, I'm sure, very nice people to live with.
Speaking of if people understand the difference between Taiwan and China, let's talk about communism.
Okay.
Do people understand what communism is?
Oh, this is
I think the question is, what do you think about communism?
That's very open-ended. What do you think about communism?
Let's see what people think about it. Maybe they think it's great.
I do not like communism I think if you look at the history of it, like the Marxism and how it translates to communism, I think that it's a utopian idea where it's like people work just to and all share. I think it's not feasible with people. I think everyone wants to be paid proportionally to what they input.
I'm afraid of I don't believe in communism like humanic system, system for humans, for any humans. It's lie, and that's it.
Does he think it will work for robots? I wanna hear more.
No, it's just funny to have this super obviously Eastern European guy who probably in his probably 40s, who not obviously, but more than likely lived through some kind of Soviet regime. No, comrade, not good. Don't do this. Don't do this. Never communism. Are these Americans? In fact, the first lady, I didn't think of it at first until we were talking about the other topic. But is she American? She has also an accent,
and she has kind of a student.
Yeah, and she has kind of if you play it.
It translates to communism. I think that it's a utopian.
Oh, what the heck was that?
Utopian idea where it's like people work just to.
People. She sounds maybe like Dutch or something, or something. She sounds like she grew up in another country. I'm just interested in that because it's like, I wonder if he has the average American person her age.
She was pretty clear-eyed about.
She was very clear-eyed.
Marxism, like that tie, because often. I guess most people would talk about Karl Marx if they talk about communism, but I think especially in the U.S., I know you've done shows on this or segments on this where, especially among young people, they talk about socialism and how that's gaining ground among young people in America who think socialism is really great and that it's going to work here. The ones who are fans of, say, Bernie Sanders, those type of policies and things in America. And then they don't see the ties to communism.
Yeah, she was.
And the deaths that she just laid out there.
Well, she was extremely clear-eyed. That's why I was just wondering whether she lived in a place that was near the Iron Curtain, because it just seemed like she was more clear-eyed than the average person that I've met in America on this topic, especially her age, which is my age. Actually, no, she probably is a little younger than me. And the second guy was an Eastern European guy. I feel like these are not representative of the American. Hold on, what is this segment? Is this segment supposed to be get an idea of what Americans think about this? It must be, because this is election night. What are you asking these people who aren't even Americans? What do you care about these topics? Okay, whatever. Let's go to the next question. Whoever went out there, you should have told them to ask American people these questions. Those people can't vote.
Yeah, you don't know that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm also assuming they're not Americans, but they're giving me clues.
I mean, speaking of voting, you saw the headlines, right? The Chinese student in Michigan who voted, even though he's not a U.S. citizen, and he knew he wasn't a U.S. citizen, but he could sign up with his school ID.
How do you not know that you're not? He's
Well,
a
no,
student.
he
He
lied.
came here for college. Like, oh, derp, am I a U.S. citizen by fact of coming here? What are you talking
Because
about?
like you can just sign up with your school ID and then like anyways.
Oh,
So
okay.
he got into
So
the
he was
system.
aware he was breaking the law.
Well, I think so, because
Oh.
the only way they caught him was this, right? So he submits his ballot, whatever, he was able to successfully vote, and then he asked for his ballot back, and that's weird. And so, officials started investigating. They're like, hold up, you're a Chinese student, you're at an American university,
okay.
but because it's already tabulated, that vote still counts. But he is now, potentially going to face jail time or at least some fines because he lied under oath, because when you sign it, you're lying. When you register to vote,
I almost feel. Well, why
you're
was he asking?
pledging.
Why was he asking for it back?
that's the thing.
I almost feel like he made a mistake. Like that.
I realized he
Yeah,
lied under
because
oath.
why would you request it back? Like that. Like just I'm just saying if I honestly did that, I would just like never talk about it again and hope no one ever finds me. I don't know. Isn't that weird? I would.
It's very weird.
It just sounds like.
That's why they caught him.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to me the point of that story is just how easy it is to cast a ballot, right? Like.
Yikes.
Like if he didn't mention that, like no.
But
Well, they
especially-
might have caught him, but I guess it's not clear whether they
Because
would have.
there's been, studies across, past U.S. presidencies, but also say like Senate, House races, and looking at how close it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And in some of these states, Michigan has had some issues in the past, because this was in Michigan, where those election results do come down to a few hundred. So it's like every vote does count.
Mm-hmm,
So then if you have something like this, where it's illegally cast but still counts, concerning times indeed.
Indeed.
Let's talk about ambitions on that note. Communist China's ambition.
Oh, yeah, okay. How many questions? This is the last one. Oh,
Two
no, it's
more. We're almost there. Ties in though, so it says, right now China's the world's second largest economy. Do you think it aims to contribute to global peace? Or does it seek to dominate and impose its communist system worldwide?
I do think, though, that there's a difference between authoritarianism ambition versus a democratic, somebody who wants to do more for the people. I mean, they're not going to say, oh, let's take over the world and be democratic. I doubt the Communist Party is going to do that.
I don't think they're an enemy at all, really, in a lot of ways. I think that a lot of that we hear from politicians is kind of just, speaking to the people, try to get them to sway left or right, and I'm not a big fan of that. But, as far as, they're like our number one trade partner, and they haven't really done anything against us recently, so I'm not a pro-war guy or anything like that.
Yeah. The hold on.
Americans?
Well, yeah. Let me see what did he say when the interview first started?
I think they're an enemy at all, really, in a lot of ways. I think that a lot of that we hear from politicians.
Oh yeah. One interesting point he made there is like, the politicians are like trying to get people on the left or the right, but it's interesting that like this is probably one of the only bipartisan issues that like probably doesn't get people to the left or the right. It's like actually like one of the few bipartisan areas that like you actually see lawmakers from like them, Democrat and Republicans work together on.
Right, you have that in the House. There's the House Select Committee on the CCP that is bipartisan.
Yeah,
and the two ranking members are Democrat and Republican.
Well,
The chairman is Republican.
Yeah, well, a lot of committees have that, but they're also effective, and there's no like weird, just stupid like political like showmanship struggles in the Chinese part. They're both pretty strong in China. So that part is not necessarily true in my opinion on his front. I know what he's saying. But it's an interesting perspective, right? That this type of guy, and the many people who think like him, do think of China as just a normal country that has its own ambitions. Which it's funny because
focus on the trade part. They're like, oh, we're trade partners, so.
Well, it's funny because if China was like a normal non-communist country, like he would be right. Like India has every country has their own interests in mind, right? Oh, but what was the question? Does China, do you think it aims to contribute to global peace or to seek to dominate and impose its communist system worldwide? Well, he didn't really answer that question. Yeah, but that's an interesting take. I wonder how many people think that way, that China is not a... But he also mentioned that he wants to just keep the peace and he doesn't want war, which I think most people also want, of course, including myself, and nobody wants war. So I wonder if his view is informed by that quite a bit. Like he leans heavily towards the non-war side of things. So
it's like kind of feeding into the libertarian mindset, right? It's like, oh, more free trade, that means more peace.
Yeah. Well, actually, the few Congress people who vote against bipartisan China-related resolutions, for instance, are libertarians typically, because they're just like, we should just stay out of countries altogether. We shouldn't have anything to do with them. Which I mean, you know, I do see that as a good view. Like the libertarian in me agrees. But since we aren't, as a nation, are not doing that, I think we need to be a little bit more clear-eyed and not just say like, well, they have their own ambitions and we should just like do our own thing and not mind them. But that's not what's happening. You know, it's like, yeah, in theory I agree with you, but like in practice, the exact opposite is happening. So we kind of have to play within that framework. So, but that's a really interesting take. I'm glad I listened to his answer.
So if we're not clear-eyed, this is a hypothetical for the last one. What do you think would happen if the Chinese Communist Party replaced the U.S. as the world leader and set up a new world order?
The NWO.
Let's find out.
Let's see.
Well, I think they already have their chance, and they already tried that, and it's taking them much longer than they thought. But they're going to keep trying, and hopefully the Americans will fight back and won't let them take control. We need good people to fight against all forces of evil, whether they're Chinese, American, corporate or government, whatever. Good is good and bad is bad, and we know which is which.
It's like I don't want to think even about it. I believe that it will never happen, and I don't believe in it, and it will never work. Every this kind of party or this kind of government failed somehow, sometimes, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this Eastern European guy is obviously very clear.
Fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I from his accent, I would guess Polish. That would be my guess.
He's wearing a Star Wars
I noticed,
jacket.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty clear-eyed. The first guy was pretty clear-eyed too, a very good American answer, yeah. I think for most people, if you say like for the people who don't like the world, the American world order, I don't think they would like the Chinese world order. Like, I don't think replacing one with the other would be good for them, Yes, I guess maybe that is representative. Don't listen to what communists say. Okay, so yeah, the communists
No, but it's so funny because they're always like, get rid of the...
Oh, Tiffany, your point is that like the communists have contradictions within their beliefs? That the contradictions are the point. The communists just, the lie, like, okay, the ends justify the means. They will say anything. This is our internal stuff. Oh, you had slavery, you can't say anything about us. Oh, you have racial divisions, you can't criticize us. But we're criticizing you right now, even though we're saying you can't criticize us, right? It's like, right there is a contradiction. Yeah, you're right. The communists are filled with contradictions. That's a very, very astute analysis, Tiffany. You're right. The communists will say whatever they need to say to get into power. That's absolutely true. Once they're into power, though, they'll do whatever they want. The words are just justification. The words are just tools to justify the ends that they're chasing.
That's your big conclusion.
That's absolutely true. If the person is a communist, you literally don't even have to argue with them. Really, like if they're a hardcore communist, they don't care.
That's a good point, though, because circling back to our first topic about TikTok, Communist China is very good at seizing on the already divisive issues in America ahead of elections, it's election day, and stoking those flames, right? So it's like what we saw, for example, the midterm elections in 2022, abortion was a big issue. Roe v. Wade was just overturned. There was a lot of changes. It's going back to the states. A lot of states have different rules, a lot of you saw protests about that. And so they would go after those issues, and often they would create accounts that look like they're American or a Westerner. So not a Chinese name, not a Chinese face. These are fake accounts, fake names, fake identities, but they would write very politically divisive topics that are very partisan to continue stoking those flames. So you go on social media, especially if you get your news from something like TikTok, you go on there and you see these opinions, these takes, and you're like, oh my gosh, like the world is just, we're just enemies. It's like you start to see the American people, your neighbor, as an enemy. And that's that divisiveness that you were seeing under any really communist totalitarian system, where you pit each other against each other. And then, but who does that help? Not the US, not the United States. Ultimately, our enemies or our adversaries, someone or something like communist China, where you have this divisiveness and just chaos, internal chaos, if you will, and it starts collapsing. You see society collapsing, and then something like communist China is sitting back, and it's like, oh great, look, I don't have to come in with my tanks.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tiffany. And
I'm waiting for the but.
Well, no, I agree with you, and I was very black-pilled with that view for a long time, because maybe in the business I'm in, I have to read news, my job is to read news, essentially, to read and to go and then once I read, if a story is worth chasing, I go deeper into it, not so I don't shy away from it, I actually go deeper into it. So my job is fully news. So I've gotten kind of black-pilled, what you're saying, oh, it's so divisive, China won't even have to roll in their tanks, this is what they've been doing, demoralization campaign. So I was really going into this dark abyss where I found myself suddenly all alone, atomized.
Starts quoting Nietzsche.
However, throw that away, because recently I bought a pair of On Cloud shoes. Have you ever heard of these shoes? They're really good. Okay, so I was just in the store. I've been recommended these shoes. This is not a sponsorship, by the way. They don't pay me anything. So I bought these shoes.
About to become one.
I bought these shoes. They're it's like walking on a cloud. Okay. Seriously, unbelievable. The best shoes I've ever owned in my life.
No more division? Where is this going?
My point is, I bought those shoes last Thursday, and all of a sudden, because the bottoms of my feet were so comfortable, I've just been walking around New York City nonstop, literally 10-mile walks per day, for the last.
Forget about 10K steps. It's 10 miles.
Yeah, 10, 13 miles. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. Let's say 7 to 13 per day. My point is that as I'm walking around for the first time in a long time doing these power walks, and I'm unplugged from the news, I just see people interacting with each other, because I'm walking through residential districts, I'm walking through business districts, all over the city, really getting a nice peek into New York. Once you unplug from the news, people are actually pretty chill and pretty nice, and they're pretty friendly with their neighbors. They're helping each other move couches. Things are functioning. I feel like it's really there's an aspect to it where the division is really just in our heads, and it's on the apps, and it's in the news. But in your real life, if basically what I'm saying is, if the electricity went out, I thought that maybe there would be a real civil war, because people would be like, oh, we got to get these these Republicans, or we need to get these communists. There would be these this type of division. But actually, if the electricity were to go out, I actually feel people would just be very fine, because their normal life is actually quite nice. People like their families, they like their neighbors, and all that really divisive stuff just gets kind of trickled upwards on social media, and you always see, when you're on your phone, you're only seeing the negative highlights throughout the entire world, right? But in your community, there's likely not a riot happening right now, unless you're in the few places that there is, but likely it's pretty peaceful, your neighbors. So I'm white-pilled. I think the future looks bright. I think no matter who wins the election, things will be good. And I'm very optimistic for the future.
It's a great point, because the next hour is you, and then we'll both be on all night for election coverage. So you'll be seeing a lot more of us tonight. But stay tuned for part 2 of this special series. We're going to be sitting down with Sam Wang. He's our NTD congressional correspondent. He actually grew up inside communist China. He's going to tell us about elections in China. You heard that right. There are also elections in China. We're going to talk about the differences between that and the U.S. one. So stay tuned for that. And be sure to check out Roman's special live before the election, and we'll see you both. We will both see you on our election night coverage.
Oh, yeah. I'll quickly mention that the way we're doing it's like a relay. So, like, anyone watching Tiffany's live, just keep watching. At the end, she's going to say something like, oh, everyone watching, click on the link below and go watch Roman. So it's like we're like kind of like daisy chaining them one to the other. So hang out. There will eventually be a link, and if you click on that link, you can watch my live, where I'll talk about other things. Also election related. They're going to be great. You're gonna be really happy that you tune in.
You will be entertained and educated. Edutainment.
And you'll be white-pilled. You'll be optimistic at the end of my segment. So
as we head into the results for the election.
Yeah. I'll be also giving as many results as I can.
Welcome back to China in Focus. It's Election Day. This is our special edition show talking about the U.S. election, but also from a China angle. So I'm here now with our Washington correspondent, Sam Wang. He actually grew up in China and experienced, elections and, the political climate a little differently from us. So he's going to shed light on how, they view the U.S. elections, but also are there elections in China? So let's get to it. Sam, good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just start with, your own experience. You left China when, and then, what did you think of the U.S. political climate?
Okay, so I first took off from China in 2016, and as we all know, 2016 was one of the most
that year.
Definitely, it was one of the most controversial and most disputed election in U.S. history, perhaps. So it was one of the most. The vibe at the time was, you can tell there were already a lot of tension in the air, and then people were discussing about it quite a bit. So I went to school. That was my high school junior year, by the way, when I first came to the United States. And then
he's a young one.
Yes, I am a young one. And when I was in high school, and then everybody was like participating in this discussion, whether you're pro-Trump or pro-Hillary, it doesn't matter. And the teacher always encouraged everyone to have this kind of discussion.
Is that different from China?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in China, you really don't have much of a choice. You have one candidate and you have one person on the ballot, and that's all you have. Yet here, they went through this whole GOP primary and the Democratic primary situation, and it was a pretty crowded election race in 2016, as we all know. So in China, yet you only have one option there.
So how does that work in China? You also go to the polls, or is there a voting process? You only have one candidate, so.
Well, honestly, that's a really interesting question. I don't even know, first of all. Obviously, we only have one person on the ballot, and that is all we have. And then in terms of the in the United States, here we have congressional elections, right? So on the House side, you elect a representative every 2 years, and then on the Senate, it's every 6 years. But in China's legislative chamber, things work a little bit differently. Take, for example, this lady, her name is Shen Zilan, and then she is known as one of the, if not the longest serving congresswoman in China. So she has been a representative for, she has been a representative for 60 years, since forever ago. And then she passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 90, but her longevity in politics was, astounding to many people. And then there were people, well, this is on record, by the way, there were people who were asking her about, what's the secret to becoming the longest serving representative in China? And she said, well, the secret is to vote yes on, is to listen to the parties. And she said, well, the secret is to listen to the party. I have never voted no on a single initiative. So think about that. For, let's say you served 60 years, as a public servant in China. You've probably gone through a lot of the different political campaigns, from going from the Cultural Revolution to the Great Leap Forward to many other things. There's got to be some legislation that contradict themselves, but she voted yes on all of them. So I guess that speaks volume.
So that sounds, I guess, at least in theory, different from what we have here in the U.S., right? It's like you vote for your representatives, they represent you, that's why they're called representatives. Doesn't sound like she's representing the people of China. It sounds like she's representing the party.
Right, exactly, and that's why she said, to listen to the party, and that's the secret to getting elected that's the secret to getting elected every few years.
And then just stay in power.
Exactly.
That's really interesting because I think, her example, Hillary Clinton has mentioned her before, having some joke being like, when I was a little girl, you were a congresswoman. When I went to college, you're a congresswoman. When I was running for office, you're
Right, exactly.
still a congresswoman.
Yeah.
And then in the U.S., you have like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but she, was a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Both sides would acknowledge that. If you're on the Republican side, you're like, oof, she's a worthy opponent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. She's at least she has some legislative proposal that went through Congress. Whether you like her or not,
she did a lot.
Yeah, well, exactly. To be a representative here, you got to have some initiative or some bill that go through Congress. But in the case, in this case with Shen Jilan, the 90-year-old congresswoman, she did not propose a single initiative. That means for the longest time she's been in Congress, she has done virtually nothing.
I want to zoom in on that. So, growing up, I know you were pretty young when you were in China, but how did you view the political system inside of China? Did you feel like you had a say in it, or how did you think of it?
I mean, first of all, there is really no transparency. That's the one thing that everyone's got to realize,
and
right?
you know that as a kid?
Yes, I knew that very much so when I was a kid, because my grandparents, they experienced some really, really tumultuous they went through some really, really tumultuous stuff back in the Cultural Revolution. During the Cultural Revolution, my grandpa was a teacher, and then he was considered a quote-unquote intellectual at the time.
So like an enemy of the state, basically.
Yes, and then but my grandparents never really had anything against the states or the Communist Party at the time. So and then so they launched this struggle session against him, which is basically having a large group of people surrounding him and condemning him, and then they even force him to eat salt without giving him a drop of water to drink. So those were some pretty tumultuous years back in the days, and then I was. And typically, your grandparents who go through that period of time, they don't usually talk about it because they wanted to protect their kids. They don't want their kids to go out and say something that can potentially get them into trouble. So, but before my grandparents passed away, my grandma, when I was in elementary school, I didn't really know much at the time, and then she would sit down with me, and then she'll have these conversations, and then she would be literally tearing up, talking about what happened decades ago to our family. Even though she talked about it in a way that doesn't seem to go against this Chinese Communist Party or anything like that, but it seems like it was a really, really traumatic experience that she had to live with for the rest of her life.
Did you have that sense that certain topics were censored, if you will, or like taboo, that you shouldn't publicly talk about them, or walk us through that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of taboo. For example, the most well-known one, the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre.
So in China, you know about that?
Yes. I was very much aware of that because having gone through that, my family, they were very, very alert about everything.
That's really interesting because I feel like normally, when you talk about China or people inside China, the Chinese people, you talk about the Great Firewall,
right.
the internet censorship. And
right.
I remember when I was in school, there was this example in world history where we're learning about, different countries and different cultures and stuff. And there's an example of these Ivy League Chinese students. Obviously, they got into U.S. Ivy Leagues, and they were shown a picture of the tank man from the Tiananmen Square massacre, and they're asked to describe what's in the picture, and they couldn't recognize it. They didn't know about it. And then there was an example of if you look up what happened on that day inside China, the internet gives you nothing inside China. So
right.
So it was just from your family, or did your friends also know about Tiananmen Square? Or?
Well, my dad was on Tiananmen Square. 1989. He was one of the students. Even though he wasn't super politically involved, but everybody in Beijing, every college student in Beijing was there, from what I heard.
It's a huge impact. Well, I guess this ties into, tonight's election night. So speaking of democracy and such, right? So those students protesting or peacefully protesting, an actual example of peacefully protesting, they were really trying to make their voices heard to get that democratic system and better access to education inside of China. And then it ended up with the tanks rolling in on these unarmed students. I want to go back to one of your earlier points. So, you're talking about, you knew about these issues, if you will, democracy, the Tiananmen Square massacre, history of what your own family went through during school years. Often when we look at what's happening under Communist China, you learn about, you have to pledge allegiance to the Communist Party.
Yes.
Walk us through that. How does that work? How young does that start?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, if you're in school in China, starting from elementary school, you are forced to join the Young Pioneers, which is kind of like a communist youth league type of organization. You know, they start you off a little bit earlier in the years. So when I was 6 or 7 years old, I was forced to join the Young Pioneers just like the rest of them, right? And, you know, my family, having gone through that whole process of, you know, persecution, if you will, over the years, we were very much aware of what was going on. So my parents and I, we reached this consent, and then we're saying, well, you know what, we're not gonna play by the rules. We're not gonna join the Young Pioneers. So for every student who joined this organization, they were forced to wear this thing called a red scarf, which is pretty much just like a red piece of cloth that tie around your neck, you know, and so I was very much against that, and I was very much not willing to wear it. So.
And does anything happen if you don't wear? Like, are you ostracized by society, or?
Well, by school for sure. Yeah, by my teacher for sure. So basically, what happened to me in the next couple of years is that, in China, in school, your teachers and your classmates, they typically value collective identity more so than your individual.
They're not teaching you to think for yourself.
Yeah, no, nothing for yourself. They're like, well, you know, since you're the only one, you're this token guy who is not wearing the red scarf, then you're dishonoring this collective group of people, which is, in this case, is my whole class, right? So my teacher at the time, she had a very systematic ways of ostracizing a person and then convince the rest of the class to get on board with her. So I was unfortunately a target due to me not wearing the red scarf. So for the next 5 or 6 years or so, I was repeatedly beaten on occasion. And sometimes she would have me stand up in front of everyone and publicly condemn me and shame me in class and make sure. And she's really good at this. She also makes sure that, you know, she gets the rest of the classroom to engage with her.
So this is like a return to the struggle session from the Cultural Revolution.
Exactly. So that was a lot of, you know, I faced a lot of pushback at the time, you know, and then it was really. The one thing that is really interesting is that every Monday in school there's this flag raising ceremony, right? So every students are required to wear their red scarf and show up, you know, on campus and salute to the flag and everything. At the beginning, I thought I could just get away with it by not wearing it for one day of the week. But it turns out of nowhere at some point, I don't remember what time, they suddenly began to enforce it on a daily basis. And the way to enforce that was, you know, they basically, they set up these student guards all around campus. These were like, you know, quote unquote good students who had good grades, who earned their position. And then what they would do is like they would go around campus and then make sure everybody is, you know, following the dress code, wearing the red scarf and everything. So, you know, me not wearing the red scarf, that naturally led me to becoming a target. So I was repeatedly stopped by these students, and then, you know, once everybody, at the time I was relatively famous or perhaps infamous for not wearing the red scarf already, and then they all understand the situation, because my parents talked to you know, my teachers about it and everything. So once these students don't really know what to do with me, they will, you know, refer to a teacher, you know, either one of the deans or, you know, this teacher who was in charge of teaching my whole class. They would come over, and then, you know, obviously that is not a good look for them, you know, and time again they would berate me and accuse me of all sorts of things, which I understand. You know, at the time, what can you really do? I mean, you know, if let's say you get a pay cut because of it, I mean, what can you really do? You gotta survive, right? You gotta pay the bills.
And given that, say, your classmates and teachers were kind of all against you and you're made infamous, did you ever want to join just so you wouldn't stand out?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the past couple of decades in China, I mean, I feel like if you're really paying attention, there's no way that you would be willing to, you know, even though for a lot of people it's just a dress code, right? But for me, it's a symbol of the bloody history that, you know, which was resulted by, you know, the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. So, you know, it's the symbolism of it was much more profound than anything else to me. So that's why I decided to not join.
And when you're in school, among your classmates and friends, how do you view the Politburo, or like how do you view whoever's in power? Like if it's Xi Jinping, how do you view him?
Well, to me at the time, it was more the Politburo was just like a rubber stamp parliament. I mean, this is technically what it is, right? So everything, there's nothing that's not going to get passed. As long as it comes from the top leadership of the country, then it's going to be greenlit one way or the other, right? The way I would view it at the time, me and my classmates, we had a little bit of a different view on China. Having gone through all the stuff that I went through in elementary school, I obviously view it in a different light because you have a different opinion, and here comes the consequences, like I mentioned earlier, right? So, it's a really, really tough thing to do. I mean, or to even discuss this matter at all in China can be pretty consequential for you. So, let's say some teachers, they're told to say certain things, but then some other teachers who are a little bit more brave. For example, one of my history teacher was willing to go off the script and talk about the Cultural Revolution for 3 days in a row. Wow. And in China, you're not. The Cultural Revolution is part of the curriculum, but it is not being taught widely. It is. You're not allowed to discuss it in length. But fortunately, I had a history teacher who, at the time, was willing to go in length about it, and then he also surprisingly talked about the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Not going to reveal his name, but wish him all the best.
How did this professor talk about these events? Because I think often, from maybe a more Western perspective, we have our perspective on it, but how was it taught in China? Is it, these are counter-revolutionary students, or did they use different terms about the students? Because in America, you're like, these are, they're seeking democracy, they're unarmed. What were the terms used in China?
Well, first of all, to discuss this matter takes a lot of courage, right? Typically teachers don't bring it up in school, but in my case, he was actually pretty courageous at the time, because he actually talked about the fallout and everything else that happened on Tiananmen Square, and then the shooting that took place. He talked about it in a really negative light, and then at times he will. And then every time he gets carried away, he's like, "Oh, sorry, I just got a little carried away. Never mind. Forget about it." And then a couple of days later, he'll get back at it again.
Wow, very fascinating. From your perspective, what was the biggest difference when you came to America? Like, what stood out to you the most?
What stood out to me the most is the democratic process, right? The checks and balances, we have all these mechanisms in place that can prevent, someone or like an organization or institution to potentially tip the balance of powers here. The system here in the United States, whether you can say it's the best system in the world or it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least it allows a democratic process to play out. Whereas in China, we don't really have that, right? So, the election here obviously is very, very consequential, and people are investing a lot of their emotions and their energies into it. Whereas in China, regardless of how hard you fight, there's always going to be that one person on the ballot.
You mentioned, from your perspective, the U.S. has the system we're under has checks and balances, right? You have the Supreme Court, you have the legislative branch, and then, of course, whoever's president, and then also Congress, these different branches. Some might, you hear on the street, some are saying, terms like stacking the court, or if Trump gets in office, he's going to put in his MAGA Republican agenda, or on the other side, it's going to be a lot more socialist in a way, right? From your perspective, is that a fair assessment, or is it terms that people who haven't lived under something like you did would come up with?
Every procedure exists. Every procedure has a purpose here in the United States, in my opinion, because basically, there are certain things that the president can do. But then, he's not overpowering others, right? And then there's other things that Congress can do that is not powering, of course, the Supreme Court or the executive branch here. So, it is, at the end of the day, it's a system that, that works itself out, in my opinion. It is not, I feel like if there is anyone who has an authoritarian leaning, I think our democracy will work against that.
You've been hearing Speaker Mike Johnson recently talking about democracy is a messy process when his own party was having
Well,
some
he's absolutely
infighting
right.
there on
Yeah,
Capitol
I
Hill.
know.
So you're in the thick of that on DC. But I think we're running out of time here a bit. But what are your final thoughts? You know, this is election night. We're going to have a huge show tonight. You might just see him actually pop up throughout the night. I'll be on all night. So be sure to tune into that. But what are your parting thoughts as we await tonight's election results?
Well, first of all, be sure to go out there and vote. I'm talking to you. Go out there and vote, and do not waste your. Yes, exactly. Few hours left. Don't waste your votes away. Make sure take this election seriously, because you're not going to get it anywhere else in the world.
Well, Sam Wang, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
If you guys remember Roman, go check out his live show now before election night, and that'll be down in the link in the description. So be sure to click on that and go check out what he has prepared. And I'll see you all in a few hours, I think just 2 hours, and we'll have our live coverage starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. So see you there.